Hey there. Ever imagined landing your dream nursing job in Australia? But getting through that AHPRA registration process,
Mm.
like way faster.
Yeah.
Well, that's what AHPRA is promising with their new fast track program
Hmm.
coming in April 2025. It could be huge for internationally qualified nurses just like you. But,
Right.
there's
And
always a catch, right?
always a catch. Yeah.
So today we're diving deep into this fast track.
Hmm.
We're going to separate the fact from the fiction
Love it.
and figure out what it means for you.
Yeah, these changes are definitely making waves in the international nursing world. A lot of buzz, and rightfully so. This fast track program, it really could change how nurses from all over think about working in Australia. But like any big change, you got to have the right info and a solid plan.
Okay, so let's cut through the noise here.
Hmm.
We both know the traditional AHPRA registration process. It's a marathon.
It is.
You've probably heard the stories, maybe even lived through it yourself.
Yeah.
But this fast track wants to change all that, specifically for nurses coming from countries with similar standards to Australia, in terms of their nursing education and practice.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there's great nurses all over the world. So for nurses who've trained and worked in places like the UK, Ireland, the USA, Canada, specifically British Columbia and Ontario, Singapore, or Spain, this fast track could mean skipping some of the extra tests, like the OSCE or the NCLEX.
Hold on. Are you saying those exams might not even be necessary?
Yeah, potentially not for those who meet the criteria.
That's a game changer for so many nurses. But what about everyone else? Those not from those countries?
Don't worry, if your country's on the list, it doesn't mean you can't apply. You can still go through the traditional route. It just might take a little longer and involve a few more steps. And there is also the option of the NZ&C pathway.
NZ&C pathway. Okay, I'm writing that down. We got to unpack that later.
Absolutely.
But before we get too deep into the how-to here, I'm curious, why is AHPRA making these changes? What's the big idea?
Well, a few things are happening. One is the big workforce shortage looming over Australia's healthcare system.
Right.
They need skilled nurses, and they need them quickly. So this fast track, it's a way to attract that global talent and get them working in Australia faster. It's also about making the entire registration process more efficient for everyone.
So streamlining things, making Australia more competitive, in that global talent market.
Exactly.
But let's be real for a second. Getting registered faster doesn't mean everything is magically solved, right?
Exactly. It's a huge step, but it's not the whole journey. You still need to find a job, figure out the visa process, all those practical things. This just helps you get to the starting line faster.
Speaking of things that people might get wrong, let's bust a few myths wide open. Myth number 1, no more English tests. Hooray.
I wish.
Sadly, not quite true, is it?
Not quite. While the fast track might change what AHPRA needs for English your visa application, that'll probably still need proof of your English skills. Something like an IELTS or OET score. Unless you're from a country where that's not required, of course.
Okay, so myth-busted English is still key. Myth number 2, registered with AHPRA, automatic job and visa. Sounds nice,
Sounds very nice.
but definitely not true.
Nope. Employers still have their own standards for hiring and a visa. That's a whole other process. Employer sponsorship or a skilled migration visa, those are still on the table.
All right, and lastly, myth number 3, fast track means super fast processing for everyone. Well, maybe.
Maybe, but here's the reality. AHPRA is expecting a ton of applications once this program starts.
Right.
So at first, there might actually be some delays, a bit of a backlog.
So patience is a virtue, and being proactive will definitely help.
Yeah.
Now that we've busted those myths, let's get practical. Where does someone even begin with all this?
First, figure out which pathway works best for you. The fast track is great if you meet those criteria, but if not, look into the traditional route or that NZ&C pathway we talked about earlier. It all depends on your situation.
Okay, so choose your own adventure. What's next on the list?
Get your documents together. And I mean everything. Proof of your qualifications, work, experience, verification, English test results if you need them, any ID or regulatory checks they ask for. It's like prepping for a big trip. You don't want to be searching for your passport at the airport, right?
Got it. Organization is key. So your pathway's figured out, documents are all set. What's next?
Start thinking about your visa strategy. Are you going for employer sponsorship or a skilled migration visa? They both have their own pros and cons, and starting your research early can save you a lot of headaches down the line.
This is a lot to take in, but I'm already feeling more prepared. Before we jump into those visa strategies and the NZ&C pathway, let's take a quick pause. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to guide you through the rest of this journey. All right, we're back and ready to dig deeper into those Aussie nursing dreams. Before we get into those visa pathways, though, I'd love to hear more about this NZNC thing. Sounds kind of mysterious. What's the deal?
It's an interesting pathway for some nurses, yeah. NZNC stands for New Zealand Nursing Council. So if you're already registered with them and you've worked in New Zealand for a while, you might be able to get your AHPRA registration faster too.
Ah, so it's like a shortcut using your New Zealand experience to get to AHPRA. That's clever.
Mm.
Okay, but let's get back to those visa strategies. You mentioned employer sponsorship and skilled migration. Can you break those down for us a bit more? What are the pros and cons of each?
Sure. So with employer sponsorship, you basically need to find an Australian healthcare employer who's willing to sponsor your visa application. The best part, it often makes the visa process a lot smoother, and sometimes you even have a job offer before you even get to Australia.
That sounds pretty amazing. Landing a job and sorting out your visa all at once. I'm guessing it's not always easy, though, right?
You're right, it can be tough to find an employer who will sponsor you, especially in certain parts of Australia. You might need to do a lot of networking and really focus your job search.
So it's all about selling your skills, showing those employers why you're the perfect fit for their team.
Got it. What about the skilled migration route? What does that look like?
Skilled migration is a bit more independent. You apply for the visa based on your skills and qualifications. And if you're successful, you get to choose where you want to live and work in Australia.
Ah, so more freedom and choices. That's tempting. But what's the catch?
Well, the skilled migration process can be pretty complicated, and it takes time. You have to meet certain requirements, get a skills assessment from ANMSC, that's the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Accreditation Council, and you might even have to go through a points-based system.
Okay, so definitely more hoops to jump through with that one. But having the freedom to choose your own path, so to speak, might be worth it for some nurses. Let's say you've picked your pathway, your documents are ready, and you've even figured out your visa strategy. Any insider tips to make this whole thing run smoothly? Here's a pro tip. Start networking now. Connect with nurses who are already working in Australia. Join online groups. Go to webinars. Building those connections can give you great insights, advice, maybe even some job leads.
That's a great point, tapping into that network of experience and knowledge. Any other hidden gems you can share?
Don't underestimate good old-fashioned research. Really dig into the registration requirements for the specific state or territory you're interested in. Some states might have extra fees or specific things you need to do for continuing professional development, or even more forms to fill out. Knowing all that ahead of time can save you a lot of trouble.
Oh, that's smart. It's like knowing the local customs before you travel to a new country. Makes a big difference. Any other wisdom before we move on?
Absolutely. If you're feeling lost or unsure about any part of this process, don't be afraid to ask for help. There are professionals called registered migration agents who specialize in helping healthcare workers navigate the Australian immigration system. It might cost a bit, but it could save you time, stress, and maybe even money in the long run.
Solid advice. Like having a guide to lead you through the maze. Speaking of guides, what are some resources our listeners can use to help them on this journey?
The AHPRA website is the place to go for all the official info, stuff about registration requirements, fees, application processes. They also have FAQs and contact info if you need to talk to someone directly.
Okay, so AHPRA is the official source. What about for finding jobs connecting with employers?
There are a bunch of online job boards specifically for healthcare professionals in Australia. Websites like Health Times Seek and Indeed are good places to start.
Cast a wide net, explore all the options. Are there any specific platforms that might be extra helpful for internationally qualified nurses?
Yes, definitely. Websites like Nursing Jobs Australia and Medical Recruitment, they focus on helping international nurses find jobs in Australian healthcare.
Fantastic. So HPRA for the official stuff, general job boards for a broad search, and then the specialized websites to really narrow things down. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about life in Australia. Getting registered, finding a job that's just the beginning. What else should nurses think about when making this big move?
One thing to remember is the cost of living can be very different across Australia. Big cities like Sydney and Melbourne tend to be pricier than regional areas.
Right,
That's what-
location. It affects your budget. What about practical things like finding a place to live, healthcare, all that stuff?
Australia's got a great healthcare system, so you'll have access to quality medical care. For housing, you'll find lots of options, from apartments to houses. It all depends on your budget and what you're looking for. Websites like realestate.com.au and Domain are good places to start your search.
Okay, so get ready to embrace the Aussie lifestyle, which brings us to a big question. How do you adapt to a new culture and a new work environment? Any advice for nurses making this transition?
Australia is known for being welcoming and multicultural, but every workplace has its own way of doing things. Be open to learning new things, be respectful of cultural differences, and don't be afraid to ask questions if you're not sure about something.
Great advice. It's all about embracing the learning curve and being open to new experiences. Before we wrap up this part, any final words of encouragement for nurses who might be feeling a little overwhelmed by all this?
Remember, you've already achieved so much by becoming a qualified nurse. You have valuable skills and the world needs them. Embrace the challenge. Be ready to work hard and don't let anything hold you back from your dreams.
You've given us so much valuable information and encouragement. But we're not quite done yet. We'll be back after a short break to wrap things up with some final thoughts and key takeaways. We're back for the final part of our AHPRA Fast Track Deep Dive. We've covered so much already, from eligibility and visas to even what life down under might be like.
It's a big move, for sure.
It is, but before we finish up, let's zoom out a little, look at the bigger picture.
It's interesting to think about how this fast track could impact nurses who aren't even eligible for it.
Oh, really? Tell me more. How could it affect those who don't fit the fast track criteria?
Well, think about it. AHPRA making things easier for one group of nurses, it might actually free up their resources, and that could potentially speed up processing times for everyone else, too.
So even if you're not from one of those specific countries, you might still benefit from a more efficient system.
Exactly like when there's a traffic jam and one lane opens up. Even if you're not in that lane, you still get to move faster.
Love that analogy. It just shows why it's important to stay informed about these changes, even if you don't think they affect you directly. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Could this influx of nurses from those comparable countries lead to more competition for jobs?
That's a fair concern, something to think about. But remember, Australia's healthcare system is huge, and there are all kinds of different needs across the country. Some areas might actually have too many jobs, while others don't have enough.
So it's all about being strategic, doing your research on those workforce trends, maybe even considering places that aren't as popular.
Exactly. Don't just focus on the big cities. Explore those regional areas, the rural communities. You might find amazing opportunities and a warmer welcome in places you hadn't even thought of.
It's a good reminder to think outside the box, be open to new things. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on something that's crucial to success in any field: personal drive.
Absolutely, this fast track program. It's a great opportunity, but it's not a magic solution. You still need to work hard, be willing to learn and adapt, and have that passion for nursing that got you started in the first place.
It's all about taking control of your journey, being proactive, and never giving up on those dreams. So as we finish up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a simple but powerful question. Knowing what you know now, what's your first step going to be?
Take this information, think about it, and start planning your own Australian adventure. Be brave, be informed, and most importantly, believe in yourself. We're confident you can make it happen.
That's all for today's deep dive on the AHPRA Fast Track program. Thanks for joining us.